The oldest anarchy server in Minecraft has been recovering from the deadliest exploit in its history, one that revealed the location of every single base on the server, except for one. Completely untraceable, it was built for the sole purpose of defending against coordinate exploits. From the outside, it looks like an ugly lava cast, but underneath is a technologically advanced marvel with redstone contraptions and an item stash worth 14,000 US. With this much money on the line, security was absolutely crucial. Direct travel to and from the base on foot was not allowed, so the only way to get there was by use of an exploit. So you're probably wondering, why was this ugly looking base one of the only ones to survive the most sophisticated coordinate exploit in Minecraft history? Well, the first step to defeating an exploit is understanding how it works, and that's exactly how the base members managed to pull this off. Today, we'll be discussing the history of Cobtopia, how it was built, the techniques that were used to make it untraceable, and how it would eventually become a front for one of the most profitable item selling operations in the server's history. The story behind this base has been fascinating to research, so as always, if you consider hitting that subscribe button, you're awesome. Now then, let's get started. If you haven't seen my previous video about 2b2t's most powerful exploit, let me sum it up real quick. In 2018, a group of hackers named Nerds Incorporated discovered a vulnerability and used it to create an exploit called NoCom that allowed them to track every player's location on the server in real time. This gave them the coordinates to every single base and item stash. If you had no knowledge that it was happening, there was no way to defend against it. That being said, our story begins in 2020. A 2b2t player named Lord Mahan had created a large item stash using duplication exploits. He had a reputation for not only duping, but for using other exploits as well. One day while he was sorting items at his stash, he received an unexpected visitor, Ox22, one of the members of Nerds Incorporated, the group that was secretly using the NoCom exploit. He began placing TNT and ended up griefing the entire stash. It was in a very secure location, and as someone who was knowledgeable of Minecraft's technical aspects, Mahan instantly knew something was wrong. His appearance at the stash was no accident. Taking what materials he could, he traveled across the server to a new location. Once there, he invited his friends and fellow exploiters Steve 3 and Redstoner. The three of them began constructing a new item stash and populating it with every piece of treasure they had. They had made good progress, but once again, they received an unexpected visitor. A member of the Nerds, Bubba J, had shown up at the stash unannounced. He stole many of the items and destroyed what was left. The three instantly knew there had to be some sort of exploit being used, but how did it actually work? Well, luckily for them, Bubba J had left behind a clue. He had griefed the stash using an account named XZ_9. This was an account that had spent the past few months logged into the server 24/7. There had actually been numerous accounts that had been AFK at all times, and one of the only players to notice this was named ZeroNeb. After he identified many of the different AFK accounts, he tried to warn the community that they were being used for an exploit. Everyone had written him off as crazy, but Mahan realized that he may have been onto something. The fact that Nerds Incorporated owned all of these AFK accounts and had managed to grief two of his previous stashes meant that there must have been a connection. While the exploit was not understood, the three friends knew that as long as those AFK accounts were online, anywhere they traveled to was not safe. The only way to stop the Nerds exploit was to use one of their own. They began testing a server lag exploit that would freeze the network traffic for about 20 seconds. During this time, all data packets sent by players were queued up, and when the network unfroze, accounts that had sent the most packets were the first to get kicked. It just so happened that the AFK accounts being used for no-com were sending the most packets. They were the first to be kicked back into the queue. While those accounts were waiting in line, Mahan and company could safely travel without being tracked. Theorizing that this would conceal their locations, the three invited their good friend Nukelord, who wanted to join them at their new base. Anytime the nerds' accounts would come back online, they would lag the server again in order to get them kicked. Once they arrived at a new location on alt accounts, they instantly put safety protocols into place. No one was allowed to travel directly to and from the location on foot. While they could use Ender Pearl loading to teleport to the base, getting new accounts there would be a problem. So they would use something called the Name Change Ender Pearl exploit. In Java versions 1.12 and earlier, the owner of a thrown Ender Pearl is determined by username. Let's say you had an account named Steve, and you threw an Ender Pearl into an unloaded chunk. As long as that chunk stayed unloaded, the pearl would be frozen in midair. In that time, you would then change the name of the account to something other than Steve. An alt account would then take the name of the original, and when the frozen pearl was finally loaded by someone else, it would teleport the new account instead of the old one. Name changes in Java Edition can take 30 days, so while it was a slow method, it would allow them to travel to and from the base without being tracked by the no-com exploit. They also made a rule that absolutely no nether travel was allowed at the base, as even just loading a nether chunk could leave enough of a trace for them to be found. At this point, the group felt safe enough to begin working. Nukelord would be responsible for designing the base. The other three would research more about the nerd's exploit, attempt to discover its inner workings, and potentially create a version for themselves. TNT dupers were used to create a massive hole all the way down to bedrock, which was then covered up by a giant lava cast. This would make it so that if the base was stumbled upon, it would already appear griefed. Underneath, auto farms were constructed as well as an area for testing out new exploits. More members of the base would be brought on, and they were teleported in using the Pearl exploit. As 2020 continued, more research was being done in order to uncover the nerd's exploit, and progress was being made. During this time, Steve 3 would actually discover a new item dupe that was incredibly powerful. This dupe, involving donkeys, allowed them to create a surplus of items very quickly. They kept the dupe private, and members of Cobtopia began creating as many items as possible. This is the same dupe that led to the now infamous freezer incident where Redstoner had to put his computer into his refrigerator to keep it from overheating. They would have access to this item dupe for 4 months. They started running out of room to put the items, so an advanced sorting system was created to keep everything organized. Remember, all of this was hidden under a massive lava cast, so they had to be as efficient as possible with their use of the space. By November of 2020, as the items continued to pile up, Mahan and Steve 3 had made a breakthrough. They had discovered the original vulnerability that made the no-com exploit possible. Pretty soon they had their own primitive version of it. They could remotely view any chunks on the server they wanted, which would allow them to find player locations. But not long after obtaining this new exploit, the server's admin, Housemaster, would end up patching the item dupe. But by that point, they were now sitting on 2,000 double chests worth of shulker boxes, all packed to the brim with valuable items. This was far more than the group would ever need or be able to use. In recent years, selling items for real-world money has become a more common practice on the server, with many individuals directly advertising their shops in public chat. Redstoner ran the numbers, and based on what other shops were selling for, the stash at Cobtopia was worth an estimated $14,000 US. They were sitting on one of the most valuable stashes on the entire server, and it was completely untraceable. Since many other groups had their stashes blown up by the nerds and spawn masons over the course of 2020, there was less competition for selling. So Redstoner, began moving items out of the stash using Pearl teleports and selling them at locations closer to spawn. Business was alright at first, but there was still a lot of competition from shops that had survived the griefs. He needed some sort of advantage to stand out from the rest. Well, in 2021, he would get one. Mahan and Steve 3 had improved their version of the coordinate exploit to the point where they could now track individual players one at a time. This exploit was the advantage that Redstoner had been waiting for. Most shop owners would advertise in public chat using accounts that were at their actual stashes. So Redstoner began writing down the usernames of all the shop owners and would travel to their coordinates, destroying every single one. Like with any free market, one of the best ways to increase profits is to eliminate competition. Redstoner and crew would spend the next few months hunting down shop owners and griefing their stashes, while selling their own product from Cobtopia at the same time. A few months ago, I made a video about how bot accounts were acting as drones and delivering items all over the server. This operation was run in part by Redstoner, and the items delivered using this service were directly from the Cobtopia stash. By May of 2021, 6 months after their first sale, they had sold over $10,000 worth of product. If you bought items on the server this year, there's a good chance they came from Cobtopia. It was starting to look like they would sell every single item. But of course, like any underworld business, things can't run smoothly forever. 2 of the members of Cobtopia that had been invited after the base was founded had quietly leaked the coordinate exploit. This single act is what eventually caused NoCom to go public, driving the server into a panic. Knowing that the players that betrayed them might eventually return to Cobtopia to destroy it, the remaining items were moved out as fast as possible. They were transported to an undisclosed location for safekeeping. What became of Cobtopia after is unknown. Redstoner would speak with leijurv, one of the players that had been working with the real NoCom exploit, and he confirmed that Cobtopia was not in their database, meaning that the original safety protocols had actually worked, and they had stayed off the radar. It's ironic. One of the few bases that survived the deadliest coordinate exploit in history was compromised anyway because of betrayal. A fitting end to a very bizarre base. But that begs the question, was Cobtopia the only base to be spared by NoCom, or were there others as well? Only time will tell. Well, if you enjoyed today's video, you better be hitting that like and subscribe button. Also follow my socials, so take it easy FitFam, and stay alive out there.